You have to understand that the majority of Scots don't want another independence referendum. That's clear from the opinion polls. It's also clear that they don't want independence from the vote that we had just 2.5 years ago, which is why I've said very clearly that Labour MSPs will vote against the second independence referendum. But here's the thing. If we have to have another referendum, if there must be one, then we've got to make sure that it is a clear choice, that people actually understand what they get, either with independence or with remaining part of the United Kingdom. And I can't possibly see how we will have that clarity before Brexit. So Scottish Labour have said very clearly we can't support an independence referendum before Brexit. That's the difference.
So what happens then if, as what's expected, the Scottish Parliament passes the idea of the second referendum next week? What happens then? Will you still be against the idea, or will you actually support what the Scottish Parliament democratically says?
Well, I've said very clearly we'll oppose it here in the Scottish Parliament, and then we have to see what happens next. What I've been absolutely adamant about is that if we have to have this referendum, we have to understand the choice. Nicola Sturgeon's whole argument as to why we're doing this is because of the Brexit result and the fact that people in Scotland voted differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. She's asserting that Scotland could somehow retain the UK's membership of the European Union. She's asserting that Scotland could have a relationship with the single market. None of these things are facts. The reality would be very, very different. And until we have those facts, there isn't a clear choice for Scottish voters, which is why I've said Scottish Labour can't support an independence referendum until we know the outcome of Brexit. I just think that's clear and sensible, and it's what the vast majority of people in Scotland understand and want.
Talking about the Brexit impact on the idea of a second referendum, the SNP do have a point, don't they? Because they were elected on a manifesto that said that there should be a second referendum if there was this change in circumstances. This is a pretty major change in circumstances, so they're right, aren't they?
Well, read the line before that in the SNP's manifesto, where they also say if the majority of opinion shows that Scots want it. And when you actually look at the detail of the opinion polls recently, the majority of Scots don't want another independence referendum. They recognise, as so many other people do, it was just 2.5 years ago, and at that time we'd spent 2 years debating the ins and outs of this on buses and pubs and cafes just like this. And we had that healthy debate, and Scots voted no. And the mandate that we had in that referendum should be respected to this day. And you have to understand, and I think you only can if you live and breathe politics here in Scotland, just how divisive that referendum was, what it did to families and communities. And I think our country's divided enough, quite frankly. I want a First Minister and a Prime Minister focused on uniting our country, not taking us back to these arguments of the past.
One person who seems quite relaxed about the prospect of a second referendum is Jeremy Corbyn. He says it'll be absolutely fine.
And he instantly regretted those comments. I think he understands that it was a clumsy use of language. There's no difference, though.
How did you feel when you heard him say that, really, in your heart of hearts? What was your instant reaction?
Well, I was surprised because it was a clumsy phrase, and Jeremy Corbyn and I are absolutely united on this issue. When you hear him talk about independence and the damage it would do, it is so compelling and so persuasive, because he makes the case that the difference between what Scots raise in taxes and what we spend in our public services is £15 billion. So if we were independent, that's £15 billion we would no longer have to spend on our schools and hospitals. So as much as Jeremy is angry at Tory austerity today, he understands that with independence we'd have turbocharged austerity, and that's why he's so against independence, and why we'll be campaigning together against it.
But Jeremy Corbyn's a bit of a liability, isn't he, really? If you look at his approval ratings in Scotland, a recent poll showed that he was at -61 with Labour voters. Ruth Davison, the Scottish leader of the Conservatives, is almost 100 points ahead of him. I mean, you'd be forgiven for wanting to rebuild Hadrian's Wall to stop him coming up.
Look, I wouldn't doubt for a second that Jeremy Corbyn is a very powerful advocate for anti-austerity politics. And actually, when you look at the job that Labour's got to do in Scotland, it's got to get back into those working class communities and speak to the people that have left Labour in the past and talk to them about how their future can be different and how you don't need independence to achieve a more equal world. Jeremy Corbyn's a great voice for that and adds a huge amount to the campaign when he comes and he talks to those communities about that anti-austerity agenda.
So he's a great voice, even though he's got approval ratings of -61.
He's a very powerful advocate for the type of policy he advocates that speaks to a particular group of voters, and that's why he's an asset to this campaign.
Who should lead the campaign to stay within the UK?
A difficult question. I think there's a lot of reflection on the EU referendum that's got to be done. I think it's clear that this time round it won't be one particular politician. I think there will probably be a search for... No, I mean, there's obviously plenty of politicians in Scotland who will advocate for remaining part of the United Kingdom.
It doesn't appear to be a standout figure, though, does it?
I don't think you need that, though. I think what might be much better is having a voice from business, or a voice from the trade unions, or indeed a particular kind of popular figure from civic or cultural life. I don't yet know who that is. Can't really blame me, given this campaign is just days old for that, but I certainly intend to play a prominent role in that campaign. But I'll be making a Labour case for remaining part of the United Kingdom, and it'll be one rooted in how we resolve poverty and inequality in this country, and one that will expose the false hope that the SNP offer. Because, you know, I walk into the same communities that they do, communities like Craigmillar here in Edinburgh. It's one of the poorest bits of the entire country, and I watch the SNP sell this false hope, this idea that the welfare system can be better, that our schools can be better with independence. How can that possibly be, faced with that deficit, with £15,000 million less to spend on the types of services that those communities and the people within them really rely on?